Kevin Price with The Price of Business on Business Talk 1110 AM, KTEK in Houston, Texas, and USDailyReview.com. I'm here in New Orleans with a great event by Inc. magazine called GrowCo 2013, getting to talk to some of the business owners and entrepreneurs that are trying to take their business to the next level through this great event. And thanks to our very good friends over at Sound Telecom, I'm able to do interviews with some of those entrepreneurs. That again is sound-tel.com. Encourage you to learn more about them and what they offer. Felicia McDoogle, is that right? McDoogle. Yeah, Felicia McDoogle. Definitely. Some of you might remember you by her maiden name, which was?
Mason.
Yes.
Mason.
I was an early fan. In fact, the first couple of seasons, I watched every single one of The Apprentice. I saw value there. Some of the lemonade stands and some of that I thought were ridiculous, but there was some value to some of the ones, and I loved it when it was an opportunity to make a person who was below the radar screen actually do something big with their lives. You were one of those early participants. You were in season 4. You went really late into season 4. Tell us about that story.
Oh, gosh. Well, it's funny that you say that because I was accused of flying under the radar for much of the season, but that is not the case. Remember, you don't see the whole story when you're on there, but it was an amazing experience. It was exhausting. The tasks were one right after the next, and I'll tell you, the way you get the farthest on The Apprentice is either by being the smartest person on The Apprentice or the hardest working. Got to be one of those two, and that's how you succeed and get through the boardrooms. Yeah. So that was a fun experience.
And so if I recall, you really demonstrated both. I mean, you were both smart and hardworking. I know that they always, in the boardroom, they try to accuse others of not being hardworking enough, and certainly not smart enough. That's probably the card most of the time people go to. But they had a hard time cornering you in that. At the end, though, you seemed a little, and I think the take that they had in the boardroom is that you were a little downbeaten by the time you got to that point. But the reality is there was a story behind a story that nobody saw. Would you like to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it was an interesting task, that last task. It was, we hadn't slept. We'd been awake for
And remind them about that task as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
That task was Microsoft Live Meeting. They hadn't launched it yet. So this was, our job was to create the campaign for launching this. And the media executives from Microsoft would come in and say, we want you to hit the following 10 points. And of course, our job was to pull those out that were the most important and those that didn't matter, or those we could market easily to clients. So the same thing that we do here at the Inc. conference. And so we immediately, Alla and I, it was down to just 4 of us. So Alla and I immediately hit the task, knowing the other team had an advantage. Randall Pinkett, who ended up winning, actually came from a media background. And he was, as soon as Trump said, this is going to be your task, he was like, yes. And we're like, that's okay, we can do this. So we really buckled down to create our advertisement, trying to put in everything they wanted, constantly extracting. I mean, it was really a difficult process, and we did not go to sleep, and realize you're in a 24-hour environment where you're taped every single moment that you're awake. You're not allowed to have a word without a microphone on. It's a very controlled environment, so you're really on edge anyway.
And do you ever forget that the microphone's on?
You do forget, but it's interesting. Right when you forget, they'd run over and go, you're not speaking into your microphone, or your jewelry's bumping into it. So,
well, thank God I'm not speaking to my microphone.
I know. You're like, goodness. I mean, it was very interesting. You had to have lights out in your suite or be under the covers in order to not be mic'd. They would walk into your room and say, okay, we'll take off your mic now. So it was a big privilege to not have that thing on you.
Yeah.
So, but you don't care at the end. By the end, you're so exhausted and you just want to be through it, and you also want to win, that you really don't care. You kind of get to that point where you will throw people under the bus, or you it starts.
Or you throw yourself underneath the bus.
Yeah, I think for me, and you look at my firing and you go, oh my gosh, she just gave up, or she was the nice girl. A lot of people, I get a lot of letters from parents saying, I hope to raise my kids like you, and I'm glad you did what you did. They really did try to convince me to throw Alla under the bus. They kept saying, the fluffers, the people who come talk to you before the interview, they kept saying, she's going to run you over, she's going to do this to you, and you've got to come back, because they wanted the fight. What's the boardroom without a fight, right? But truly, she put her heart and soul into it. She really did. And I was exhausted, of course. But I am not a person that's everything to win. Right. I wanted to win, but not at all cost.
Right. You wanted to keep your integrity in the process.
Yes. very much so.
Yeah, and in the end, and you two were friends as well, so that made it a little complicated.
We were and still are,
yeah.
Amazingly enough. So it definitely made it complicated, and they knew that.
Yeah.
And interestingly enough, if you watch my firing, Trump brought up something I didn't bring up that Alla did in the task that was wrong. So, Alla's take on it today is she was meant to be fired during that, and that may or may not be true.
And what's interesting about that, because he used that against you, that you did not use that against her.
Well, of course. I stood up to be the project manager, and honestly, in business and in life, I hope that if you really fight to take a leadership role, that you take responsibility for the failures in that leadership role as well. And that is not what Trump taught in that lesson.
Right.
Because he said, I fought to be project manager. I really did. I said, I can do this. He doesn't necessarily reward that. He rewards winning, which is important. But as we equally talk about in this conference, failing is just as important.
And maybe in that show, it's the only thing that's important because it is a show.
It is a show,
right?
If you fail, what message does that send? And Trump certainly doesn't send that message, right?
You're really good at answering questions. I'm sure you did a lot of interviews on this, but you did a great job not answering my question, which was the story behind the story that was going on. That was really quite dramatic and rather distracting. Talk a little bit about that.
Oh, well, that was actually, and interestingly enough, I'll tell you the story that very quickly that got me onto The Apprentice is my mother died when I was very young. I'm a pilot, good on paper, right? I have a technology degree. I knew that when I interviewed, I'd probably get it, just because I'm competing against women who may not have the same resume. And but 3 weeks before the actual tryouts, my father had a heart attack and died. And a friend of mine wanted to try out and said, please come with me, and I had no intention of trying out. I said, I'll come with you up to Chicago, and I stood in line with him, and we stood 100 people apart, and then they brought us in. We got a wristband. I got a wristband from Bill Rancic, and we went in and they asked us the question.
Bill was the winner for season one.
Season one, and he was actually handing those out in Chicago for that interview. So I still had pictures where I'm like, oh, hey, Bill. Starstruck, of course. And the question was about FMLA. I owned a small company. I owned some multifamily properties around, and I knew it inside and out, so I nailed the question. And at the end of the interview, they said, who would you want to hire and who would you want to fire? Much in the spirit of The Apprentice, and everybody was really pissed at me because I was so small business, and they were corporate types.
Right.
One guy was screaming, it was spit coming out of his mouth, and because the question was, should you have to disclose if you're pregnant to your boss? And of course, my answer was a resounding yes, absolutely. That can take down a small business. I'm sorry. Personal stuff aside, I've got a business that employs people here. So they were all corporate types, did not agree. And at the very end, they said, who'd you hire and fire? They all said, I'd fire her, and they picked somebody else. And the very last gentleman, his name was Asa, I'll never forget him, very good-looking African-American man, sat back in his chair and said, I would not only hire her, I would make her my project manager, and we would win. And we both went on to the next phase. They said, you stay and you stay.
Yeah. And
I don't know what happened to him. I have no idea where he is, but I'll never forget because he was so calm and collected and cool and saw it for something different than the emotion. So that's how I got on The Apprentice. It turned out that, and I didn't know that, they send you 2 Southwest tickets and say, we'll see you in New York in a week and a half with a huge disclaimer, confidentiality agreement. So I didn't know I was going. I had, in the meantime, purchased a downtrodden hotel here in Lafayette, Louisiana, an opportunistic thing, and applied for an SBA loan and just been granted a very stringent SBA loan. Which what SBA loans aren't, right? They're very difficult. And it had all these provisions, and I had to agree to basically the punch list of things that I was going to do. And so they offered the loan, sent that to me. Well, I left literally that day. So it went unanswered. And I wasn't allowed to call. I wasn't allowed to tell anybody. I had one person on a list that I was allowed to talk to, and my phone conversations were tapped. So they were very specific, you know what I mean, while you're on the show. So 8 weeks of filming in New York went by, and they rescinded the loan in the meantime on my hotel. And went by, and I came back to what can only be described as hell because I didn't have money. Everything was in peril. You know, I thought, oh, yeah, I'm done with The Apprentice. I come back. This is great. I'd done well on the show. I was exhausted. I wanted to sleep for a week. And this is after all the Howard Stern interviews and Donnie Deutsch interviews and all of those things that you do. But I came back to bankers breathing down my neck, very upset.
They weren't nearly impressed by what you had just done.
No, they were loaning a large amount of money to someone who had just fallen off the face of the earth for 8 weeks. And they're like, "Who do you think you are?" I mean, money talks, right? So I had
call Donald Trump, please.
Yeah, I've got a personal reference here. So I had to go back in before the board and basically beg and plead and explain. I even told them I placed very well. I completely violated my NBC contract to get the loan back, telling them where I was, how I did, and all of that in the strictest of confidentiality. And they did give my loan back to me. Thank goodness. I had to sign a new loan agreement and go through some hoops and reestablish some things, but they gave it back to me. It funded on the 5th of August. And the month of August was a hellacious month for Louisiana. We had Katrina and Rita hit that month, and I was fully underway under construction. I had big machinery and equipment digging out pools and all kinds of stuff, and it was absolutely crazy. People were stealing my front doors. I got new front doors in, laying on the property, and then they were gone.
Wow.
And I'm like, are you kidding me? But I ordered mattresses and blankets, and none of them could get through because they weren't emergency equipment, right? So that was the downside of it. It was very difficult. I missed a lot of the Apprentice episodes. I actually didn't get to see them until after, when I went online and tried to find them. And I missed, obviously, pushing the publicity part because I was down here patching as best I could, everything I could. We didn't have electricity or cable, nothing.
So my understanding is that you stay all the way through The Apprentice before, and you get to leave after the show is done when you did it. Is that right?
Well, they actually tape it before.
Right.
Yeah. So they taped it in April.
But do you stay together until the very end?
Until the very end. If you get fired, you stay in New York and you get treated very well by Mark Burnett Productions. You go to shows and do all this fun stuff while the other people live out hell in the suite.
Right.
You know?
Can I get fired first?
Yeah, I'm not kidding you. Those people are really great friends, and that's something that I did miss out on because I was on the show the entire time until the last episode, was those people really bonded because you still couldn't call home. You still couldn't leave because they'd know the order. And so they just got treated like kings and queens in New York by Mark Burnett Productions. You know?
So, Felicia, we had an unusually long interview, but you're a spectacular guest. We're delighted to have you with us. Felicia McDoogle, you probably knew her from The Apprentice. Before we let you go, kind of give us real quickly your speech of what you're doing today, you and your husband. Okay.
So I've gotten out of real estate development in the Section 8 side, basically for safety reasons of family. You grow up, you can't do that stuff forever. And now I have a property and casualty firm, insurance, and that piggybacks off my husband's mortgage bank, and we have a title company. So we're looking to take that to the next platform of financial planning and getting some really great ideas here at the Inc. 500 conference.
Yep. And a website for your husband's company or for anything you want?
Absolutely. My husband's company is getamortgageplan.com. Don't misspell mortgage. Getahomeloan.com will get you there as well. And my company is QuoteMeKC, as in Kansas City.com.
Awesome. Thanks for being with us. All right. Kevin Price for here in New Orleans for GrowCo. Don't forget to check us out at priceofbusiness.com and usdailyreview.com.